When it comes to design firms, there are few companies that compete to win the highest profile jobs nationwide. However, over the past 42 years, Michael Kleinberg has solidified himself and his firm as one of the premier service providers in New York, Stamford, Miami, and Washington, D.C. Today, we are privileged to have this industry icon and the president of MKDA join. What's really going on? Michael, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be here, and that is a bigger intro than I've ever received.
Well. Certainly deserved. So, Michael, you've been in the design business for over 4 decades, and although you're probably a man who needs no introduction, can you tell us just a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about MKDA?
Sure, absolutely. So MKDA was founded actually as Milo Kleinberg Design Associates by my dad. We just celebrated our 60th year. And thank you. And no small feat. I only take credit for part of it. And we are experts at corporate design, interior planning, and so forth. We work for tenants. We work for landlords. And we really create great environments for people to work in. That's the elevator pitch.
So I love the elevator pitch. So let's talk about your father for a second, because obviously he was the founder and a pioneer in the business. So you started working with your father in the business, and he emigrated from Vienna in 1939 and was originally a handkerchief salesman, according to my research. And what he established is now one of the most recognizable names in corporate interior design. Can you tell us about your father, how he shaped the company, and most importantly, his impact on you professionally?
Absolutely. So my dad always had talent, and that's what drove him, design talent, which is what drove him to study design and then eventually start MKDA. I would say that there's been really a huge impact on me over the years, especially the earlier years. And my dad was, and he's still around, is very driven, as you know, really starting from nothing. One would have to be driven, talented, as I mentioned. He started out in the fashion district, which at that time was called the garment district, and he would be designing showrooms. So 1411 Broadway, for instance, when it was built,
know the building well.
He was involved with the ownership. And at that time, they were trying to get not only showroom tenants in, but they also had sewing rooms behind. So in their actual offices.
That's why on the other side of the building, there's the statue of the man sewing.
That's it. So that's really where he started, and then the firm evolved. But as far as the impact on me, it's really a little bit of everything. He always taught me to stay the course, do everything for the long run, be fair to people, do the right thing, and a work ethic to work hard, that you don't get anything on your own. You have to, and he had to work very hard, and I continue to do that every day. And now I try and tell that to not only my kids, but everyone who's part of the MKDA team.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, because your passion and your work ethic's very, very apparent. You know, we've had the privilege and luxury of working with you on countless deals from the tenant side. And the fact that you just show up and you're there from start to finish, you don't really get that kind of senior level experience with, you know, someone like yourself very often from your competitors, which brings me to my next question is, how do you really differentiate yourself in such a competitive landscape from your competitors in the market?
You know, there are subtle nuances there. And we are a 70-member firm today. And so we compete with firms that are 100, 200, 300, and a couple of thousand. So we have to be as good as them or better. And I think it's a little bit of the personal touch. It's a little bit of family ownership. And that's how it goes down the line to our team members. So we have people that are with the firm for 10 years, 15 years, 20, 25, someone even 35 years. And, of course, we have young talent also. But that's how I treat and we treat each other in our studio, in the office, is how they treat clients. And so it's not only the level of design, it's the level of care and so forth. So for instance, we have a designer that's with us a long time. He may have completed a project 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I may say I want to check something out. He'll come up with me, and the receptionist will give him a kiss. So, you don't find that often.
I think it's also the attention to detail, right? And that goes on what you were talking about. And Lance mentioned we've had the privilege of working on a number of deals together, but we've also had the privilege of placing a number of tenants in the suites that you guys have pre-built for landlords. Right. And you see the care that goes into that work, and nothing's wrong, right? There's nothing missing, and things that you wouldn't even expect to be there are there. And I think that speaks volumes to the attention of detail, and how that's another way that you guys differentiate from your competitors.
We all try to do that.
Yeah.
Well, you all try. Not everybody succeeds, and I think that's a testament to your success, right? You're on some of the most highest profile buildings designing pre-built, and we'll get into that later.
Right.
And more importantly, if you look at some of the deals that we've worked on together, whether they're hedge funds or investment banks, they interview a number of design firms. They choose you. And, I've had the privilege of working with other groups as well, but I feel like when we're working with MKDA specifically, there's a different level of hand-holding, like I said at the beginning, that you give. And from the top down, everybody on your team just pays close attention to pretty much everything from start to finish, and there's no hiccups. So, it all starts with your culture, apparently.
We work at it, and I try and be copied on many emails so that if something does slip or miss, that I'll see it at night, and we straighten it out right away.
I love that.
So changing gears a little bit, since you started your career, obviously things have changed dramatically in the world that we live in. How have you seen commercial office space and the way that people work change over the decades, 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, all the way up until today? How have you seen that change and evolve? And
it would be really interesting to hear specifically about each era, because I was a Mad Men fan.
So let's first straighten it out. So basically, let's start in the 80s, not the 70s. But so you go 80s, 90s. I was thinking about this. So first off, if you start, let's say the 80s, that if you may see office spaces that were actually built then that are still around occasionally, and of course it was very enclosed spaces, right, private, so that if you graduated to receive an office, it was a closed space, and workstations, as you might remember, had these 60-inch tall panels and sometimes even 72-inch, and it was this enclosed area. And if you had high-profile projects, whether it be finance or law, there was more detail in it when it came to woodwork and so forth. So that whole thing is totally changed, and it actually started to change in the 90s. So it didn't just change 5 and 10 years ago. In the 90s, things started to, let's just say, open up.
Was that the tech boom?
And it was the tech boom, and a little bit before even. And I remember meeting someone who was in the production business, post-production, who wanted a very cool office. And that was probably early 90s. Yeah. And he said to me, Michael, and at that time he was wearing jeans, okay? So that was a big deal. And he said, Michael, you got to be cool. And I'll never forget that line. And we designed a very, very cool space for him. And so things started to change really in the 90s. So that's, maybe 25 years. And over time, it's evolved. And so it's evolved by encompassing almost every industry. So at that time, it was only a few industries, right? If it was tech or post-production or the music industry, we did Polygram Records way back at that time and so forth. But now everything is very different. And so it's not one size fits all,
right?
But it does go across the board.
So that's a really good answer. And that brings us to our next question. So there's been a major trend among tenants doing more with less. You hear these buzzwords all the time. And I think a part of this stems from densification and the rise and implementation of communal spaces and building a sense of community. Can you speak to this trend and whether it's here to stay? Also, are you starting to see a lot of these industries that were the front runners with these changes kind of push back, on, the open plan concept?
So, there have been quite a few articles written about this, whether it's in the Times, the Journal, Cranes, and
Harvard Business Review a couple of weeks ago too.
Right,
Yep.
right. There was even one in the Times. We saw a photo of one of our spaces, which we didn't know about. But
Gotta love that.
right, exactly, exactly.
Good PR.
It's always good. I would say that open space and densification are here to stay. That's not going to change because part of that is economics, right? No one is going to say, all right, I'm going to now change my ratio and we're going to take another X percent space. However, the ones specifically that were very, very open find that they need more huddle rooms, phone rooms, conference rooms, whatever it may be, private spaces.
Right.
The ones that didn't have that originally. And I think that if you go then across the board, again, you keep the densification, but you need those areas for people to have private space. And all of us need that. And if you're sitting at an open desk, you may need to take a phone call private. You may need to sit with someone else. And so there needs to be enough of that, and that whether that's a percentage, it depends on the actual industry, so that the people can function and that whatever industry it is can thrive in the space, in the environment that they're in.
Do you think that companies like WeWork, for instance, have had a significant impact on the way that you design spaces going forward? Because if you think about it, a lot of these early stage companies start in a WeWork or an hotel, then they outgrow it, and they're used to certain communal components of those facilities. Yeah. So have you seen over the last, call it 5 to 10 years since the meteoric rise of these firms, that people are asking for things that they're accustomed to?
100%. 100%. I'll tell you, interestingly enough, correlation, so we just opened recently in D.C. And,
congratulations.
Thank you. And we have to do some more work with Savills there. But we're in a WeWork. So we started with one person, so we had a desk. And a month later, we had 2 people, so we moved into a room. A month later, we had 3 people, moved into a larger room. Now we have 4 people. And we'll keep growing. So at the moment, for let's say the first year, I'll say the first 12 months for sure, that works for us as far as growth, although your question really is more on the communal areas. And when I go down to D.C., which I'm doing in the morning, it's in a brand new building in the D.C. WeWork, and they're great communal areas that I love to sit in. And I can do my work so easily there, and no one's disrupting me. And it actually works. So in our projects, we do.
Well, I want to ask you something else, and I just thought of this while you were speaking about kind of, growing and moving to a room, then moving maybe to a larger room. Do you think in the future landlords will be able to adapt that quickly with pre-builts, maybe modular pre-builts where tenants can grow? Do you see that maybe on the horizon?
Maybe, but what I see today, and maybe you can either corroborate it or tell me what you think, is that with not only WeWork, but that model with all the other competitors that they have, has really absorbed the smaller tenants, right? And maybe that's good for the market because the New York market has always been pretty good. And so working for landlords, we really are not designing the small spaces anymore.
Sure.
And so they're going to WeWork, and I'm not so sure that landlords want to be in the small space business.
That's really interesting that you say that, because obviously our team does a ton of work with startup hedge funds.
Right.
And the market for small built spaces has become so tight. Right. And I guess that's a testament to the rise of coworking, and now they have other options. And I never really thought that
highly in demand.
Highly in demand.
And it's very expensive for landlords to build those small units that are higher end space.
And it's hard for them to amortize their costs when people who are in the small space market typically want to
they could build a bigger unit. They could build a bigger unit, have 1 pantry instead of 2 or 3. All of the expensive items like conference rooms and sheetrock. They get more scalability on a larger project.
That has changed over the years, and they're a lot less of those units designed.
So you're designing a lot less small pre-built units than you have
Absolutely.
in the past.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Good food for thought for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to ask another question. In the past couple of years, obviously you've seen what's gone on with Hudson Yards and the World Trade Center, all these new pockets of new construction in New York, and there's been a flight to quality where many occupiers are opting for new construction over older building stock. Can you explain to us the efficiencies of the newer construction buildings in New York versus the older building stock?
Sure. Some of it is easily apparent to everyone. So you have the higher slab-to-slab heights, which give you the light and the air. You typically do not have convector units, so you may not even have the heating or AC at the perimeter. It may be coming down from the ceiling. So you're saving space there, and you rarely have columns. So, of course, depending if it's a base floor, you will have some columns, and an upper floor very rarely. And so tenants have more efficient space, and it's easier to plan when you have wide open spaces. They are, on the other side, some of the new buildings being built have rather large cores, and sometimes there's what we'll call usable area in those cores, and so the loss factor actually goes up, which
Interesting.
the average, or let's just say 90% of people will not pick up on that.
Have you walked One Vanderbilt yet?
I have not, but we're doing layouts right now.
Yeah, because it seemed, I walked the floors, it seemed like that core was actually fairly large in comparison to some of the other buildings.
Most of the newer buildings today have the large core, and some of it, like down, as you know, at the Trade Center, is done for a reason, for the strength of that, for impact.
Sure, especially with no columns
and
on the floor
right,
plates. Yeah,
exactly.
So apples to apples, how does it measure out?
I would say you're pretty close.
Okay.
But the actual efficiency, perceived efficiency, and the layout that you can get is better.
Okay.
So on that point, do you have a preference designing for older vintage buildings, which a lot of these cool tech creative companies want to be in? Even financial companies want to be there.
Right.
You worked with a hedge fund client of ours that moved to 315 Park Avenue South. That's a 1920s vintage building, and because of that, you were able to achieve exposed brick, extra high ceilings, some rare skylights. But is there a preference when you're designing space? Do you like going in and seeing old bones, or?
So I guess, one could go both ways on that, right? And that's what makes life interesting and what we design interesting. And so it's great to design an open floor plate with an open floor plate in a new building. And exactly as you say, the inherent beauty of brick and the steel is terrific. And sometimes there are challenges, right, in getting around the columns and everything else, without mentioning the actual buildings here. So I would say we like that variety, and it's definitely more of a challenge to work in the older buildings, and sometimes more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we hear it often that some tenants will prefer to be in these older vintage buildings because it's more in line with their brand. Right. But then once you reach a certain maturity, I think for the most part, you want that efficiency, and you want to recruit and retain talent and wellness, which is going to be our next question. So,
right. That's what you have, down on the west side beyond the Hudson Yards. Obviously, if you have some of the large space users, right, they find that there's not enough older stock around, so you got to build it.
That's right, like Facebook and Amazon and all of those guys. So while we're on that topic, wellness and sustainability, those are two of the hottest buzzwords in real estate, and I'd imagine in your line of work specifically. What are some of the trends that you're seeing pertaining to wellness and sustainability, whether it's LEED certification, whether it's the way people are working, natural light, building systems, how they're kind of accommodating for that going forward, and what you can do to add value for people to maximize?
Right. So it's a little bit of everything. So part of it is through engineering, the HVAC mechanical systems and so forth, and part of it is the actual base building system, and then what the engineer can bring to the actual floor plate for the tenant. And for us, it's probably twofold. So one is actual physical, so the type of desk, sit-stand desk, the type of lighting, LED lighting. There could be daylight harvesting, so it gets brighter in a dark periods of time, and vice versa when it's lighter out. And the other part is, for quite a few of our clients, if not all of them, we will have various rooms. So one may be a yoga type room, depending on the tenant, right? One may just be maybe a fitness center, depending on the size again. One may be a relaxation room that has a certain kind of chair in it. So all of that. And then the simple thing, which of course you see almost everywhere, is what type of communal cafe area. So cafe, that is also part of wellness, is how can someone step away from the desk and feel good. So it's the light, it's the air, it's how if they want to sit or stand at their desk, and then where can they go? Can they exercise if they want to? If they want to eat something, can they go within the space to that's pleasant and have a space to sit and or congregate with, speak to someone.
Spontaneous interactions to kind of foster that collaboration that everybody wants, that back in the 80s, not the 70s, and the 90s, people really didn't have. And it's integral, I think, to every organization. I know people congregate in our happy room, we call it, for lunch almost every day. And it's probably one of the highlights of my day, getting to interact with my colleagues and my friends, because being social at work for me is a big part of what keeps me here because of the people. So you want to foster that community. So I'd imagine pantries are becoming the highlights of spaces right now.
It sometimes is, and depending on the type of tenant, is sometimes right there in the entrance. We had one project we did at 5 Bryant where they actually had a barista up front, and it was a little bit like a coffee bar and so forth. Of course, we've done on the other end, we've had, as you've seen, I'm sure, kegs, and that's for later in the day. But
it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
But I would say exactly. But I think everyone is considerate and thinking about that.
Yeah. So circling back a little bit to something we touched on at the beginning of our discussion, the pre-built boom and landlords designing pre-builts. Obviously, you guys work with a lot of landlords in New York City, and I would imagine that you help them design some of their pre-builts. So when you are designing those, how have you seen landlords requesting certain trends, and how do you see that changing, and how have you seen it changing?
So it's changed 180 degrees, like everything keeps changing. So one of the first high-end pre-builts that we designed was in the 90s for Barney's, or Barney's owned the building at the time, which is now defunct, but 660 Madison.
Yep, that's Opera.
And that's right. And that's building has changed hands 6 times. We've managed to stay with each ownership, amazingly enough. But the original pre-builts were high-end pre-builts. So at that time, they had wood and glass partitions, full glass, special lighting, and special stone floors, et cetera. And it was always laying out how many offices fit in the unit, and those were smaller units and so forth. And now, many, many years later, everything has changed, everything. And as landlords are competing for tenants, even though it's a tight market, it's saying, what's the next best thing? Right. But the truth is, you have to dummy it down and think, okay, simplicity first. What do tenants want? So you're not overbuilding the space, right? You're first thinking about the experience when one walks in, the flexibility of it, meeting rooms, conference rooms, phone room, maybe 1 or 2 offices, and then the ability to change. So typically, more often than not, at least 50% of the time, we're designing a full floor that could be 15,000 feet and building that out. And maybe 75% is open or 80% is open, but all the systems are in on the flooring and the lighting and everything. And so it's set to go. And that floor is usually the catalyst for leasing the entire building. That's on
it's a show floor, typically.
Right. But ready to go as a pre-built.
Of course. And
as opposed to, and we do some of this still, but a lot less, where you take a floor and you divide it into 3 or 4 units and say, okay, this is 4,000, 7,000, and so forth. There is that. We do that in some buildings in the city. We have that in 1251 with Mitsui and others. Or sometimes there's take-back space is that the right word for let's say a law firm takes a lot of space?
Expansion space.
Expansion, sorry.
Yep.
And maybe there's 25,000 feet left, and we'll divide that into 2 units or
like the options. You mean the option space that the landlord has? Well, there'll be a finite period, and you know, obviously a tenant isn't going to lease short-term space for 5 years on 25,000 square feet, let's call it. So the landlords will divide it and pre-build it.
That's actually a really good segue into not the landlord side, but the tenant side. So when you're doing these customized build-outs for tenants, what are the recurring themes? And I know we've touched on this a little bit, but to get a little bit more granular, what are the recurring themes that tenants are asking for, and how have those differed historically?
So everyone is concerned about attracting talent and retaining talent. It's almost like an overused word now.
But it's so true.
Exactly right. And so we recently completed a space for an accounting firm. And from day one, when they came into us, they sat down, and we're supposed to be driving this process with the workplace, but they started it. And they said, we want to start over totally and forget what we have now. And we had to actually reel them in a little bit because they were so far out there. But at the end of the day, they still needed their offices.
Yeah.
But when you walk the floor, you don't even know their offices because everything is glass and open ceiling and concrete and so forth, and flexibility. But everything that we touched on prior fits in to how a firm can be successful, how an organization, a firm, whatever. Some have talent working from home, but the majority of the clients that we have, I would say the vast majority, there may be flexibility in work hours, et cetera, but they have their own desks. Some of the large corporations obviously have more of the hoteling. And in the accounting firm, there were some desks that are obviously where people are out in the field, the auditors, et cetera. But everything we touched on before, the light, the air, the communal space. So with them, there's a huge space that's not only cafe, but multi-purpose area with bleachers. And they can use it for after-hour meetings. They can use it whenever. And it's accessible. You have to walk through it.
So I think the other thing that you're saying is that office space is becoming a lot more experiential.
Exactly.
Right? Similar to retail. And I think Jamie's generation is different than my generation, which is different than your generation. And I'm finding that the younger talent pool, they want experiences, right? And they want to come to work and they want to have those serendipitous interactions with their buddy on the other side of their floor or whatever it is. But more importantly, they want to have that sense of community and really feel it and experience it. And that's really what you have to bring to life, right? When somebody has this vision, you know, no matter what company you are, your office space and your talent, that's the backbone to your brand, because that's where people create everything that drives your profit margin. So how do you really engage people? And are you seeing any trends in terms of engagement, just thinking further ahead, that just our listeners should be conscious of to get better engagement from their employees?
So when we come in, I'm not sure I'm giving you the right answer, but you can correct me. So when we come in and we really start with our workplace strategy, we listen first to see how a company works today or a firm works today, and then give them slides, examples of how everyone else is working, how we think that they can be more efficient, how can be more experiential, and really all of that to show them everything, and then interview various people, if not everyone in the company. So no one's being surprised, and we're going to listen to what they have to say, because it's not one way, right? So when we designed the accounting firm Friedman, we learned from them. And so it's that back and forth. When you sit around a table and you want to get ideas, it's not one person may come up with a great idea, but more people will come up with better ideas. And so all of our designers, and especially our creative director, is always coming up with the next best thing, and look at what other firms have done with their other moves, whether we designed it or not, it doesn't make a difference.
Sure.
And try and push it forward.
So when you're thinking that far ahead, do you think there's a shock factor for employees and C-level management when they actually go to the final product and they're working in a completely different atmosphere? And more importantly, is there a way to kind of temper that going forward? Is there a checklist to get people prepared to moving from an office concept to an open plan?
I think that it's like anything else in life. Nobody likes to be shocked.
Totally.
So, or most people don't like to be shocked. And so if we are with them and listening to them and showing them what the next best thing is, meaning what the new space is going to look like, then if anything, they're going to say, wow, this is really great.
And you hit the nail on the head, and this is exactly what we need to foster our culture.
Right. And so generations back, or let's say decades back, it was always top-level management were making the decision. Every once in a while, we still meet someone like that. That makes it fun. But other than that, when we designed Cambridge University Press, they had us in every meeting. And so everyone knew, and they were coming out of offices, what they were going into.
Interesting.
So you have worked on so many deals over your career and represented so many different groups and so many different landlords with office spaces, and even now designing buildings in certain markets, correct?
We're starting to do that in Miami.
That's right. So
I won't take too much credit personally.
But the firm is doing
Yes.
it. Now, you've had a long, very successful career. What is your single favorite project that you've ever worked on, and why?
So I knew you were going to ask me that. And, you know, it's hard to say because we have a lot. And because we're not designing 50-story buildings, it's interior space that each one has their own, aspect of interest and so forth. I'll just pick out two for the moment. One was done in the early 90s where I think I might have mentioned before, Polygram Records, which started, it's kind of interesting how we all get our clients and deals and so forth. And it started as a patch and match in their existing space, and they ended up taking 10 floors in what that time was a new building, Worldwide Plaza. So that was when Zeckendorf put up the building, and they started with 4 floors and went to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what was interesting there is that each floor had a different president, so each record label. And today there are a little bit less labels, and of course we call it records still.
Sure.
But and each one had their own design, totally different. And each one of those presidents was a personality, as you might imagine, in the music business.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was really...
And an ego.
Right, huge
Yeah.
ego. And at that time, they had the large corner offices, which today, where I may not have mentioned that earlier, corner offices, of course, a no-no. It's always communal space. But there they had huge offices. But it was exciting and interesting to be able not only to design, but to negotiate the various personalities and ego. Second one, I would say, we actually designed in this building maybe 4 or 5 years ago for Epic. I don't know if you've
That was
seen
Iris.
That was Iris, right.
Incredible space.
Right.
That reception area
Ridiculous
is
space.
Right.
unbelievable.
So I will tell you, separate from what we're discussing right now, that Ira gets a little bit of credit on that, in that he walked in. So that was old law firm space originally. Of course, it was totally demolished, and we took down the slab in an area of maybe 700, 800 feet probably, if not more, and create the 2-story. And Ira also had part of that idea. So I'll give him credit. But that was really it's still there, very, very exciting space where you need a client to share in that vision.
So what makes these projects exciting to you?
It's a little bit of both. So it's who's on the other side of the table. Who are we holding hands with? So it's the type of person, the type of company that makes it exciting and gives us the latitude for the vision, or they have their own vision and we're working together on it. And that is better than someone just saying, create whatever you want,
Right.
and they may not like it at the end.
You need the vision from them.
We do it together.
And you do it together.
We do it together. And we have a partner. The projects come out so much better.
So, I was going to ask you, obviously I sent you these questions in advance about if you had a favorite industry. It sounds to me like you're industry agnostic, right? And that you just like exciting partners to work with that share your vision that you could work with. But that being said, do you have a specific industry that you just love working with?
Well, I would say that, the more of the startup and techs are energetic and give you that room and push us to design that great space. What on the other side, what we don't enjoy doing is we're not looking to do the large corporate spaces where they have standards and they just want us to roll out the drawings and say, okay, this is the standard for the office, the standard for the workstation. We have the finishes. We just need you to do a set of working drawings.
Turn that away? Large corporate? You heard them, people.
But that is not exciting whatsoever. And, you assign someone, and a couple of our people, to do it, but there's zero excitement.
Yeah.
And it's all in meeting like we all do, these great personalities, these great thinkers who start companies and start more companies and who think, and they get us energized. And so you energize each other, and that goes across the board.
Interesting. So switching lanes a little bit, technology. Technology has obviously started disrupting every business, whether it's real estate, law, design, finance. How have you seen technology start to come into your day-to-day? How has it disrupted your business, or so to speak, and how do you see it continuing to change over the next 5 years?
So I don't know if there's actual disruption, but technology, like in any business, plays a huge role. We have, actually, my nephew is our director of technology in the office, which is not a great spot because I always give him a hard time, but non-income producing. But
and not disruptive enough.
But we are constantly upgrading hardware and software.
Right.
And the basic is AutoCAD, but then there's all kinds of 3D programs and Revit and on and on and on. But what that enables us to do is design quicker and really react quicker. So there's the creativity part, there's the timing part, and all of that is, when I started, I'm not that old, but I was drawing by hand.
I was going to say, and then AutoCAD came along.
Hopefully no one's, scared hearing that. But
grid paper.
Right. I was, but now we can, whatever we do over the past X years, and it just goes, you can segue into this in the entire world and how everything goes, because everything that we do every day is faster and faster and faster.
Instant gratification.
And we're in one of the fastest paced cities in the world, right? If you look at other cities, they move at a much slower pace, which I can't do. When you're used to this, it's like you're on a treadmill, and or if you're going 75 when you're driving, all of a sudden you slow down to 40. It's like I'm not moving at all.
Right.
So I think we all get a rush and we enjoy, and you accomplish when you're productive, when you're really moving quickly. And technology enables us to do that.
Well, so this brings me to my thoughts on that. So are there programs that exist yet where tenants could kind of edit spaces that you create in real time and offer their feedback and maybe move walls around and partitions?
There are, but the actual fact is it's not that efficient.
Sure.
And usually comes back not the way we want it or the way they want it. I will say, though, over the weekend, a client did email me a plan back that he told me he worked on in Photoshop, and he did a pretty good job.
I've had a lot of clients like that, and I've actually mastered Photoshop because of that, where clients will tell me that they want a few walls down, and I'll copy and paste.
So there you go. So that does it. Whether it's really a time server, but it's all good, and it's still not going to replace, at least short term. I cannot think out, 50 years, I don't know. But in the short term, I don't think it will take the place of what we do and how we do it. It's just, can we interact easier?
Absolutely. And it's funny because oftentimes when I bring up technology, especially in these types of conversations, we all think about how it will affect our business and potentially replace us or disrupt us. But the way I also look at technology today is from a marketing standpoint, right? Raising visibility. So if you think about when you started your career 40 years ago, you didn't have LinkedIn. You would have never been on a podcast.
Sure.
You probably didn't have a Facebook because it didn't exist yet. And I think from a marketing standpoint, obviously you have a stellar rock star in Adam Miller that's your head of business development.
Right.
But I think that every company has to start thinking differently about marketing. And I don't know if you as the president have really started to think about social media and how it really can affect your brand.
Right. So we do have we have a group of 3 in our communications and marketing department, and one of them is on social media. So I personally am not a huge social media fan.
Sure.
Of course, everyone else in my company and my family is. So even when it comes to birthdays, my wife is the one that gets the wishes. But she also posts, and my brother posts pictures of when I was like 5 years old, but which I never get to see. But certainly it's a large part, and Adam, who's our head of business development, is really runs with that a lot.
Yeah. And I guess speaking of change in technology, quantifiable data has become increasingly important to tenants when making decisions. What types of information are you collecting as it pertains to industry-specific benchmarking? And have you seen any notable trends in industries, such as, call it finance, legal, tech, et cetera? And how do you apply those metrics to them?
Right. So in simple language, it can boil down to square foot per person. And even with finance, there's so many types of what one might call financial companies, whether they're trading, whether private equity, on and on and on. And so we do look at those, and we look at the way that they function, and do we design a fitness center, and do we design a cafe, and how many offices, and how many feet per person, et cetera, and basically across the board. And that's all good, and tenants that we meet are interested in it, but then it has to still come back to what works for
Sure.
the individual client personality business, if you may.
Got it. And what I meant by quantifiable, for instance, if you install that gym, right, the tenant decides they want it. Are there ways to track that incremental increase in productivity of the employees based on the installation of the gym or the collaborative area, et cetera? Just because I know so many companies are focusing on big data these days. So I think it would just probably be interesting, if it doesn't exist, to maybe have some sort of analytics behind it. Because when a client's maybe
Absolutely.
considering the cost of a gym, gyms are very expensive to install, as we know. There's acoustical engineering that goes into it, and then the actual construction itself. You know, you might be able to justify that CapEx if you see the return on your investment. So that was really the impetus for that question, but could just get the wheels turning.
It's great. No, it did. I already made notes.
So, first of all, thank you so much for coming on today, Michael.
Awesome.
It's been a pleasure to have you. Just let's get a few words from you on what's really going on in the world of design in New York City right now.
So everyone who you meet and I meet is into flexibility, right? Because nobody knows what the next day brings, right? You don't know what the stock market brings, what the, that goes to space, goes to your business, goes to space, goes to our design, goes to the construction dollars, A to Z. And so really flexibility is where it's at. So whether that's in the square footage and whether it's the type of design that we have. So if someone wanted to sublet space, or they want to bring in more people or less people, how can they do it easily? And that's what everyone is looking for, to make my life simpler, because life is complex. Maybe it always was, but we all think it is complex today, right? Even with the technology, and how do you make it simpler? We're always seeing new products for design and coming up with designs on our own. And so our creative director and our designers are always out there. And that's what makes things exciting for us. I have my son who's finishing 5th year architecture school. So
third generation.
Third generation, although hopefully not for another 5-6 years until he gets beat up somewhere else. I want him to, really get that basic training somewhere where he gets beat up. I got beat up, but all kidding aside, there's always new, because otherwise we're not moving, right? And there's always better. And in our industry, so two things. So one is on your side, of course, there's always a lease expiration, right? And that's what creates movement too. And we have so much intellectual talent here, right? I'm just thinking of New York. So many startups, so many smart young people, and that is an impetus for good design, for everything, right? Fueling growth, and that's what makes us, happy and do great things.
You are so amazing, and you're so passionate about what you do. Honestly, this was so amazing. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
No,
it was great. I enjoy
fun.
the time. I mean, you got me out of my office.
Perfect. Your first podcast. Michael Kleinberg's first ever podcast. Michael, thanks again.
Thank you.